As President Trump pushes to end the war in Ukraine, President Zelensky has fired back, accusing Trump of living in a disinformation bubble. Trump shot back, calling Zelensky a dictator without elections. That sent Washington, D.C. into a tailspin. But with Russia now controlling nearly a third of Ukraine's territory, it's worth asking, who's really detached from reality here? That's today's Faith Check News.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boy.
I'm Brian Tuttimore. Thanks for joining us on Faith Check News, where we take the news and we filter it through the lens of God's truth. We want to spark a lively conversation and invite you into a community of people who want to think right to live free. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky seems convinced they can defeat Russia outright. Just this week, he reportedly pitched his so-called victory plan to the White House and other world leaders. But here's the kicker. Has anyone actually heard a serious discussion about this plan's details? The answer is no. Have you seen anyone explain how Ukraine would reclaim the land lost under the Obama and Biden administrations? Land Russia has held since 2014 and expanded in 2022. I haven't, and I bet you haven't either. And that brings us to Trump's claim that Zelensky is a dictator without elections. Strong words, but it might come down to, is it tomato or tomato? Is Zelensky a dictator or dictator? Yes, Zelensky won a landslide victory in 2019, and Ukraine's parliament has backed him. Yet Zelensky chose to declare martial law after Russia's 2022 invasion, and since then, he's wielded powers that mirror a dictator's. For instance, all elections are suspended. No presidential election since 2019, no parliamentary or even local elections. A mandatory draft forces all men age 18 to 60 to register for potential conscription with no opt-out. 11 pro-Russian political parties banned. Opposition isn't just quieted, it's outlawed. National TV consolidated into one state-run channel under Zelensky's control. But what about public protests or assemblies? Strictly forbidden. But why is this important? Isn't this just two hotheads lobbying for public sentiment? Consider the ugly shadow of corruption in Ukraine. Before the war, Ukraine ranked among Eastern Europe's 5 most corrupt nations per Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. Since 2022, with billions in American aid pouring in, corruption hasn't slowed. Over a dozen cabinet members and staff think President Zelensky's ministers and top aides, well, they've all been forced out over scandals. Broader still, over 116 military officials, from recruitment chiefs to commanders, have been sacked since the war started, accused of fraud and graft. That's with U.S. taxpayers footing a $175 billion bill. And it gets worse, because the United States gets nothing in return except good vibes, while European nations get repaid. Europe's getting a deal for funding Ukraine's fight, while America's getting hustled. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio laying it all out.
I was personally very upset because we had a conversation with President Zelensky, the Vice President and I, the three of us, and we discussed this issue about the mineral rights. And we explained to them, look, we want to be in a joint venture with you, not because we're trying to steal from your country, but because we think that's actually a security guarantee. If we're your partner in an important economic endeavor, we get paid back some of the money the taxpayers have given, close to $200 billion. And it also, now we have a vested interest in the security of Ukraine. And he said, sure, we want to do this deal. It makes all the sense in the world. The only thing is I need to run it through my legislative process. They have to approve it. I read 2 days later that Zelensky's out there saying, I rejected the deal. I told him, no way, that we're not doing that. Well, that's not what happened in that meeting. So you start to get upset by somebody. We're trying to help these guys. One of the points the president made in his messaging is not that we don't care about Ukraine, but Ukraine is on another continent. You know, it doesn't directly impact the daily lives of Americans. We care about it because it has implications for our allies and ultimately for the world. There should be some level of gratitude here about this. And when you don't see it and you see him out there accusing the president of living in a world of disinformation, that's very counterproductive. And I don't need to explain to you or anybody else. President Trump's not the kind of person that's going to sit there and take that. He's very transparent. He's going to tell you exactly how he feels. And he sent a message that he's not going to get gamed here. He's willing to work on peace because he cares about Ukraine. And he hopes Zelensky will be a partner in that and not someone who's out there putting this sort of counter messaging to try to, hustle us in that regard. That's not going to be productive here.
NATO countries are tapping interest from frozen Russian assets to offset their cost. They're getting repaid. The U.S., not a dime back. The fix could be a mineral rights deal. It's a win-win for the United States and Ukraine. The deal would recoup billions for American taxpayers while giving Ukraine assurance because now the U.S. would have a vested interest in stopping Russia's further advance. So, is it dictator or dictator? Is it fair to label President Zelensky as a dictator? Well, it's about legitimacy versus operation. Zelensky didn't seize power through a coup. He's not an illegitimate tyrant. But under martial law, his near absolute control makes him an operational dictator. President Trump's call of dictator without elections isn't just rhetoric, it's technically correct. Ukraine's reality isn't victory. It's survival amid corruption and loss. So, who's living in the disinformation bubble now? The Bible tells us as Christians to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and obviously in the same way, to pray for peace in the world. Now, I believe that God has blessed the United States to be a force for good, not just for its own people, but also in the world. So in the same way, we should pray that God would empower the Trump administration to bring about peace in Ukraine and to end the needless bloodshed. That's today's Faith Check News. I'm Brian Tettamore. Remember, think right to live free.